It was fascinating to see a column recently by CBC's Editor-in-Chief Brodie Fenlon explaining their defense of fair and balanced coverage. Now, we've shared many examples over the years of CBC's highly unbalanced coverage, so I wanted to see what standards they claim to uphold. Fenlon says CBC's goal is to give Canadians a 360-degree view of a story. He says this lets his readers, listeners, and viewers, news consumers like you, draw their own conclusions. But he quickly adds that CBC doesn't try to provide that 360-degree coverage within each news story. Instead, he says it happens over a number of stories over time. That's a very different definition of fairness than they teach in journalism school. For example, Canada's Radio Television Digital News Association Code of Journalistic Ethics states journalists should be fair and balanced. It warns that they should avoid personal biases and keep commentary separate from news coverage. As we've been proving for years at Honest Reporting, CBC and its reporters have a long history of blurring all of those lines. Fenlon mentions that he gets a lot of emails complaining about platforming certain viewpoints. We're proud that many of those probably came from Honest Reporting members upset by CBC's hostile Israel coverage. Fenlon then lists people and groups that members of the public have demanded that CBC exclude. The list starts with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and representatives of the Israeli Defense Forces, and then immediately lists Gaza's health ministry and representatives of Hamas. This isn't really a fair representation. Honest Reporting has never asked that Hamas be excluded from CBC's stories. In fact, we've often criticized the CBC for failing to mention Hamas. But if they do mention Hamas, especially if they quote its leaders or statistics, we do demand that CBC note its status as a terrorist organization. More to the point, despite Fenlon saying otherwise, there is absolutely no evidence of anything even remotely resembling balance at CBC, in print or in broadcast, when it comes to the Middle East. Anti-Israel sources are quoted and platformed many times over, while opposing voices are given space extremely rarely, and in some cases, not at all. Fenlon also claims that quoting a source isn't endorsement. That may be technically true, but it still makes the public see the source as credible. Like Francesca Albanese, a UN official who distorts Holocaust memory to accuse Israel of atrocities, or journalists like Abu Bakr Abed, a correspondent for Iran's state-run propaganda outlet. And then there are the CBC journalists who regularly parrot casualty numbers from the Gaza Ministry of Health, aka Hamas. They do this without noting the real source and why it's problematic. At the same time, they rarely cite Israeli sources. They dismiss Israel's security concerns and imply skepticism even when there's plenty of evidence. We've seen this from more than a few CBC journalists, like Sarah Jabakanji, who signed an anti-Israel open letter in 2021. We've called out others as well, like Chris Brown and Evan Dyer. They brought in questionable sources, blasted Israel with unfounded allegations, and in some cases, whitewashed the most heinous acts of terror. Media objectivity isn't just about quoting both sides. It's about fairly presenting motives, context, and truth, giving the public enough background to understand the issues. As CBC's editor-in-chief, Brodie Fenlon seems very proud of his novel 360-degree approach. In fairness, he legitimately seems to believe that over a number of stories over time, CBC's coverage balances out. But you and I have seen over the years that it doesn't work, especially when it comes to Israel. With so many CBC journalists so deeply biased against Israel, their coverage will inevitably lean that way. As Canada's public broadcaster, Fenlon and the CBC can't just say they provide fair coverage. They must actually do it, giving a voice to both sides of the story.